I was a uni student and was living alone at the time. My parents weren't supporting me, so I was working part-time at family restaurants and convenience stores until I realized that becoming a private tutor had much better pay. Usually, you have to make a profile online, and there's a lot of paperwork involved, so instead of going down that path, I got permission from my neighborhood and made my own flyers. My offer was to teach English and Japanese to middle and high schoolers for 3,000 yen an hour. I left my phone number at the bottom. A few days later, I got a call. It was a woman and she sounded middle-aged and told me she'd seen my flyer and asked for me to tutor her son. She asked for me to teach him for 4 hours every single day. I couldn't believe it. That's 12,000 yen a day. I know, I was stupid. I should have realized it as soon as she asked me to tutor for 4 hours every day. Anyway, she asked me to start the following day at 5 p.m. I ate an early dinner and headed over to the address. The house was old and standing alone with not many other houses around. It gave off an eerie vibe, but I was about to make some good cash, so I proceeded to ring the doorbell. I heard the same voice from the phone call and for some reason felt a bit relieved. When she opened the door, I was at a loss for words. Her head was covered in dandruff. She had the darkest bags under her eyes, and to top it all off, a creepy smile across her face. I wanted to run away right then and there, but my need for money won. "Please, come in." Her smile got wider. "Thank you," I said as I entered the house. Pretty sure my voice was shaking. I asked her where her son was, and she said, "Over here," as she led me further into the house. I was scared shitless. The atmosphere in there was off. We finally went into a room, and I could tell straight away that it was a child's room from the decor. I looked around. There was a wardrobe, TV, bed, stuffed animals, toy robots, a desk, and a kid sitting at it. I made my way over as I said, "Hey there." When I got closer though, I realized it was a doll. It was the size of an actual child, looked to be handmade, and was wearing clothes. Its face is what scared me the most. It was made of cloth and just had 3 black circles on it, like the character Shy Guy from Mario. "This is my son," the woman said, still with her smile plastered across her face. I must have looked blue at this point. I needed to get out of this house straight away. I made the mistake of saying, Excuse me? This is a doll, isn't it?" She flipped out and yelled, "What are you saying? This is my son! His name is Ken!" Her loud voice and sudden change in demeanor startled me, and a few tears escaped. I honestly felt like she was going to kill me that day, and I didn't want to die. I tried to calm her down and said, Okay, I understand. Ken, hey, nice to meet you. Do you want to study together?" It was enough to appease her as her creepy smile returned. Obviously, Ken didn't reply. Because he was a doll, there was no conversation to be had. I was just talking to it, or maybe I should say him, the entire time. The 4 hours felt like actual hell. The short 10-minute break did nothing to change that fact. This is the verb to be, so you have to use this form here. 4 hours of teaching him English grammar, and all the while the woman was sitting behind me watching us. To say I felt creeped out and scared is an understatement. It was finally time to end the session, and I said to Ken, "It's time now, so we're done for today." No response because, as I said, Ken was a doll. The woman said with her smile, "Thank you so much." Trying not to look at her face, I began to gather my things to go home. "It's late now, so why don't you have dinner before you go?" "Oh, no, please don't worry. I ate just before I came here." There was absolutely No way I was going to eat food that she cooked in this nightmare of a house. "Eat dinner here!" she yelled. She was crazy. That much was for sure. I was afraid she might kill me, so I reluctantly agreed. She led me into what I'm guessing was the dining room and sat me down on a chair. She took out a knife and my heart almost stopped. She began cooking and I was soaked in sweat from fear. She took out a dirty pot and started to cook something. Soon after, I began to smell some curry. I was relieved it wasn't some weird dish. "Here you go," she said. The curry was plated on a dirty dish and the spoon was one of those plastic ones you get when you buy a bento box at the convenience store. "Itadakimasu," I said quietly and slowly put a spoonful in my mouth. It was your regular curry. Didn't taste bad, nor good. "How is it?" she asked. "It's delicious," I replied a bit too excitedly because I didn't want to piss her off again. "Oh, I'm so glad. You should stay over tonight," she replied, the corners of her mouth widening into that same creepy smile. I couldn't wrap my head around what she had just said. "Oh no, that's all right. I can't ask that of you. Ken will be so happy if you stayed over." No, I'm okay. I can't stay here tonight." "Stay the night! You'll make Ken upset!" I keep repeating myself, but I was terrified. I didn't want to stay the night, but again, I really didn't want to die either. I felt like I had no choice, and so I agreed with the plan to escape in the middle of the night. She put me back in Ken's room. I was freaking out about having to sleep in a room with this creepy doll. She laid down a futon and said to Ken, "Aren't you happy your teacher has agreed to stay the night?" Then she said to me, "The toilet is next to the dining room, and make sure you don't go upstairs." I decided to wait in Ken's room until she went to sleep. This was when I realized I'd forgotten my phone at home and I was beating myself up about it. I could have called for help if I hadn't been so dumb as to leave it behind. Thinking the crazy woman would be asleep at midnight, I decided to wait quietly until then. It was 10:30 p.m. and I laid inside the futon quietly. When I looked at my watch next, it was 1 a.m. I must have dozed off a bit. Being quite certain that the woman had fallen asleep, I decided to take the chance to run away. I walked ever so slowly, trying not to make a sound, and tiptoed towards the door. One step, another step. My heart was beating so loud that I thought the thumping would give me away. "Where are you going?" My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. I knew I was finally going to die. When I turned around, I saw her sitting on the floor and watching me through the gap in the door. Was she sitting here the entire night keeping watch? My blood drained from my face and I felt cold. She said, "You're not trying to go home, are you?" I panicked. I screamed and ran back into the house. I knew the window in Ken's room wasn't big enough for me to fit through, so I went up the stairs to the second floor. I saw a door and opened it. It was pitch dark. I turned on the light, and what came into my sight horrified me. The room was full of stuffed toys and dolls. I stood there, unable to move. I heard a laughter coming from one of the corners of the room. When I looked over, I locked eyes with someone or something with a huge head, its eyes looking like it was about to pop out of its sockets. More laughter. I'd never felt fear like this as I pissed my pants. I ran and opened the window and jumped from the second floor onto the road outside. I didn't feel any pain and ran like hell all the way home. I couldn't sleep that night and my legs started to throb, so I went to the hospital the next day where the doctor informed me that my left leg was broken. I moved away after this incident and have never gone back to that house. I never want to. What was the last thing that I saw? Was it a person? Anyway, that's the end to my story. There were some comments on this story, and I'll share a few of them with you here. Comment 1. The woman probably kept her handicapped son locked in that room. Comment 2. I think the person you last saw was actually Ken, and because he was handicapped, the mother made a doll to escape reality. Comment 3. Did you end up getting paid? To which the writer responded, No, I didn't, but I was happy to get away with my life. Comment 4. You must have been so scared. Pretty sure Ken was the actual person you saw at the end. Was he really in there in the pitch dark? He probably laughed because he was happy to see another person. Comment 5. The more I think about it, the scarier it gets. This happened to a good friend of mine from high school. His name is Atsushi. At our high school graduation, his best friend Kenta confessed his love for him. In case you're unfamiliar with Japanese names, Atsushi and Kenta are both males. Atsushi was really caught off guard and turned Kenta down in the nicest way possible. Kenta, though, begged him for just one date, and feeling a bit sorry for him, Atsushi agreed. For this date, they went to watch a movie and ate at a restaurant, something even friends do. When it was time to go home, Kenta asked, If I was a girl, would you have ever dated me? Atsushi was moving soon to go to a university in another city and was pretty sure they'd never see each other again. His high school years were a lot of fun because of Kenta, and he had a lot of fond memories with him. Feeling a bit saddened by all of these emotions, he replied, If you were a girl, not only would I have been dating you, I probably would have married you. Kenta started crying and said, I'm so sorry. Thank you for everything. Goodbye. Atsushi couldn't hold back his tears either, and he watched Kenta walk away until he disappeared in the distance. A few years later, a girl called Mariko, who was working alongside him at his part-time job, told him that she liked him, and they eventually began dating. Mariko had a habit of saying, I'm so glad I was born a female. Atsushi never paid it much attention, but the frequency in which she would repeat those words eventually piqued his curiosity, so he decided to ask her why she thought so. Mariko replied, Because if I was a male, you wouldn't have agreed to date me. When she said those words, he remembered Kenta. He hadn't thought about Kenta at all, but what she said sounded so much like the last words he spoke before they went their separate ways. Not only that, apparently, they were also standing in the same spot where they said their last goodbyes. At that time, Atsushi just figured it was just a coincidence, but naturally, he started to pay closer attention to Mariko's mannerisms, and he realized how they closely resembled that of Kenta's. The way she laughed, ate, read a book, and the things she liked, like her favorite food, music, and movie, everything was exactly the same as Kenta's. He wondered whether Kenta underwent a sex change and had plastic surgery to get closer to him, but he had already met Mariko's parents. They weren't the same as Kenta's, and he'd also met her high school friends too. And most of all, their heights were different. Kenta was more than 170 centimeters, while Mariko was tiny, standing a bit over 150 centimeters. All of these things obviously meant that this was all just a huge coincidence. He convinced himself that he was looking for similarities between the two of them, so that was why he could find so many. But one day, when they were watching a movie at Mariko's place, she said, "You remember this? This was the movie we watched on our very first date." Atsushi froze, because it was the movie he'd gone to watch with Kenta. He'd never seen it with Mariko. "You must be mistaken," he said. "This movie came out before we even met. You must be confusing me with your ex." No way, I watched it with you, she replied. She went on to describe how their date had gone in great detail, how he had spilled the ketchup on the hot dog, and how they felt lucky because the cashier made a mistake with their change. These details were all true, which freaked Atsushi out. Soon after, he came up with an excuse and went home. After this incident, he became afraid of Mariko and he ended up breaking up with her. It was a very messy breakup, to say the least. She cried her eyes out, lashed out, tried to harm herself, and he had a really hard time calming her down. He quit his job shortly after, cut off communication with his friends and family, and disappeared for a while to another city. When we were finally able to contact him again, he told me this story. I just said, "Why are you even afraid of her?" And what he told me convinced me that maybe he did act accordingly by going off the grid for a while. He told me that when he broke up with her and just after she slashed her wrists, she said, "You told me you would marry me. That's why I tried to become a girl." When he first told me the story, I automatically thought that all the similarities were just coincidences. The whole thing about their first date at the movies was a mistake on both parts. I figured Atsushi had told Mariko about the date with Kenta, and she, being obsessed with him, began to believe that it was something that happened between the two of them. But the last thing he just told me, about her yelling that she was trying to become a woman, well, there's no explanation for that, is there? Atsushi swore that he'd never told Mariko or his friends from work anything about Kenta. He's gone off the grid again, but I remembered this story when I saw the topic, so I thought I'd share it with all of you. There were a few people that commented on this story, sharing their thoughts on who Mariko was. Maybe she was a good friend of Kenta's and heard the stories from him. Also, Atsushi doesn't know what happened to Kenta after he moved away, but he doesn't believe he's dead or anything, so... How about you? How would you explain what happened in this story? Let me know in the comments below. Nice to meet you. I have some psychic abilities which was passed down from my grandmother. What I'm about to share with you is the scariest thing that I've experienced to date. I'm a caregiver, and when I tell my friends this story, they always freak out, so I thought I'd share it with you here today. 6 years ago, I was working for a company that provided home care services. I got contacted by a care manager from another company asking me to help provide care for a schizophrenic patient. It was a family of 4, the parents, a daughter, and a son, and all of them suffered from some type of mental illness. They lived in a 2-story house, and one day they found the daughter dead in her room. She had committed suicide. About 3 months later, they found the mother in the daughter's room after another supposed suicide. The police stepped in to question the father and the son, but because of the difficulties in trying to communicate with them, the case was closed without finding out the real cause of death of the mother. 2 months after this was when I got asked to help take care of the father. 3 days after starting my services, the son was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. Only myself and my manager knows anything about what I'm about to write here because we worry that if the other helpers found out, no one would want to work there anymore. One day, I had to go hang the washing outside on the balcony. To do this, I had to walk through what used to be the daughter's room. It happened when I stepped back into the room after I finished hanging the clothes out. I saw a woman's face slowly appear on one of the walls, and she was looking at me. I wasn't afraid. I just thought, she's still here. 2 months went by and a new helper got transferred to my branch, and this person was put with me to help out in this house. After about a week, she pulled me aside and said, "Excuse me, I wanted to ask you something, but that house, it's haunted, isn't it?" Her question caught me off guard. According to her, when she went into the daughter's room, she saw a woman peering at her through the futon, which was piled in the corner. Feeling that there was no point in keeping the past a secret, I told her what occurred in that room in the past. I asked my manager whether he spoke to the new helper, but he said he hadn't, so I guess this new helper could also see certain things that others can't. Another 3 months had passed when I noticed that the father would go up to the second floor more often. He would go up every day and go into the room, stare at his wife and daughter's photos, looking overcome with grief. Although there was a bathroom downstairs, he never used it and would use the one across from the daughter's bedroom instead. The helper began saying that the atmosphere upstairs was too strong and oppressing, so she didn't want to go there anymore. And to tell you the truth, I felt the exact same way. One night, I felt a great sense of dread and couldn't sleep very well. The next morning, although I felt very apprehensive, I made my way to the man's house. He was usually always asleep in the bed on the first floor, but he wasn't there. I called out for him a few times, but got no reply. I hadn't gone upstairs to check yet, so I mustered up my courage and headed up. There, I saw the husband sitting on the toilet. His eyes were rolled back into his head, his tongue protruding out of his mouth. I quickly ran over and shook his shoulders, calling out his name. He was cold to the touch, and his body was stiff. I called the ambulance and they took him to the hospital, but he was already deceased. The police came to ask me a few questions, but they concluded it as a natural death. My services were obviously not needed anymore. I don't know if his wife and daughter called him over from the other side, but I can't help but feel sad and sorry for the son who was left behind and is still in the psychiatric hospital.